All right, so on behalf of EIAS, it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this EIAS webinar, Bridges Over Troubled Water, Security Situations in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea after the Hong Kong National Security Law. We would have been delighted to welcome you all in Brussels physically, but unfortunately the current situation has forced us to do otherwise and to welcome you all online instead. We really look forward to the discussion this morning. We will have two sessions. The first panel will actually address security dilemmas in the Taiwan Strait with a very nice panel moderated by Mr. Xavier Nuttin. And then at 11 o'clock, with a small break in between at 10:45 or 10:50, we will have a second panel addressing the South China Sea's perils, moderated by Mr. Serge Strobans. So without further ado, I would like to pass on the floor to Mr. Xavier Nuttin, who will be chairing the first panel. So thank you very much for joining us all this morning. We really look forward to the discussion, and hopefully you're all very healthy and very safe, and we hope to see you soon in Brussels again. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon for those who are abroad. This morning, the first panel will be on security dilemmas in the Taiwan Strait. I am Xavier Nuttin. I'm a senior associate of the European Institute for Asian Studies, and it will be my pleasure to moderate this first panel. As we just mentioned, maritime security and freedom of navigation are issues of rising importance, especially in East Asia. It may also well have wider implications, notably in the US-China competition, and therefore on the world geopolitical stability. The Taiwan Strait, which has recently seen mounting tensions, is without doubt a hotspot. Since the landslide election or re-election of President Tsai in January 2020, China and Taiwan appear to be drifting further apart. Moreover, the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong in June proves that Beijing is not prepared to accept any challenge to its rule. China posturing, including rhetoric from Xi Jinping and efforts to isolate Taiwan, including the Chinese Navy increased presence in the Taiwan Strait, as well as targeted military drills, have no doubt created new tensions and led Taiwanese leadership to review the island's military capabilities as the balance of power is changing in favor of Beijing. In a speech marking Taiwan National Day, as recently as last 10th of October, about 2 weeks ago, President Tsai promised to strengthen Taiwan defenses and work more closely with regional partners on security. President Tsai said that the government would continue to modernize the island defense capabilities and enhance its capacity for asymmetric warfare to, and I quote, to deal with military expansion and provocation from the other side of the Taiwan Strait, end of quote. But she also called for meaningful dialogue with China. Again, I quote from her speech, as long as the Beijing authorities are willing to resolve antagonism and improve cross-strait relations, while parity and dignity are maintained, we are willing to work together to facilitate meaningful dialogue. Indeed, the increasing capabilities of the Chinese military, in particular its naval capabilities, has called into question whether Taiwan could resist any serious military offensive. Taipei is therefore taking steps to strengthen its defense, and we all know that in late August, Taiwan purchased 66 of the F-16 jets from the United States, the first sale of such technology since 1992. And as recently as last week, the US announced the sale of advanced weapons systems to Taiwan, including missiles, and on Monday, 2 days ago, more sales were announced on coastal defense system. All this obviously brought a very sharp reaction from Beijing. The US is Taipei's strongest ally and remains by far Taiwan's biggest source of arms, but is not alone. According to SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Taiwan has been the recipient of arms export from dozens of countries since 1950, including European countries. Indeed, for example, in April this year, Taiwan announced the purchase of weapons from a French defense firm to upgrade decoy launcher for its Navy Kanding-class frigates. But let's be clear. Beside rare and short freedom of navigation operation by the French Navy in the South China Sea, the EU has no military presence in the region. And what is more worrisome and of concern for the future, the EU is not yet perceived as a credible hard security actor in the region. So in that context, in that broad context, what would be the best move for Taiwan to maintain cross-strait peace and stability? We will discuss this morning with our three distinguished speakers, and I thank them, all of them, to be with us this morning. And we will start with Mr. Ivan Štefanec from Slovakia, member of the European Parliament from Slovakia. He was previously a member of the Slovak Parliament from 2006 to 2014 before being elected to the European Parliament. He belongs to the EPP group and in the European Parliament, and is also a member of several committees and a member of the EP Taiwan Friendship Group. Actually, he has quite a long history in working with Taiwan, dating from his previous years in national politics. I was told that he even received a Friendship Medal of Diplomacy from the Taiwanese government. And Mr. Štefanec also served as the head of the Slovakia-Taiwan Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Štefanec, the floor is yours for 10 to 15 minutes. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nuttin, for very, very nice introduction, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to talk to you this morning about this very important subject, not only about the South Asia, but also for the whole world, I do believe. This year, I'd like to mention three events which were quite unique. First one was, of course, this national security law in Hong Kong, which effectively it imposed the People's Republic of China criminal system onto the Hong Kong common law system, leaving them with complete discretion to decide who should fall into which system. I think this is really the problem, and European Parliament reacted quickly. European Parliament adopted a resolution in June, basically bringing China before the International Court of Justice over its decision. And second event I'd like to mention, it was quite a unique visit of the Speaker of Czech Senate, Mr. Vystrčil, in Taiwan. I do believe it was a very, very successful visit, and it gives a signal. And what was interesting was also quite strong reaction from China. Chinese Foreign Ministry Wang basically threatened EU by saying that Czech Republic will pay a heavy price. It is unusual diplomatic language, and not only Czech Republic protested, but EU institutions immediately reacted very quickly, which this is something what has never happened in history before, that China basically threatened EU country. And thirdly, I'd like to mention also that basically, as it was introduced already, that Taiwan this year reinforced its defense by the purchase of 66 of the latest model F-16 jets from the United States. And basically, it was the first sale of such technology since 1992. And not only that, Also, basically, 2 days before, US State Department has approved the potential sale of 100 Boeing-made Harpoon coastal defense system to Taiwan, which immediately had or caused some reaction in China, and China announced that it will impose sanctions to US companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing Defense, Raytheon, and other US companies. So just to be sure, to be in loop what's going on. And now in terms of security dilemma in Taiwan Strait, I'd like to shortly talk about the motivation of key players, and this is Taiwan, China, and the US. From point of view of China, I think the key is to understand that Chinese see themselves as so-called Zhongguo, the Middle Empire, which was and it is destined to rule the world. And they would really like to unite Taiwan by all possible means, probably before 2049. China would like to be also the strongest country in Asia and possibly the strongest in the world. And China would like to be the economical superpower, which is the challenge for US and particularly for EU. So China prefers peaceful unification with Taiwan. However, it's losing ground with Taiwanese citizens. The will of Taiwanese people to immediately unify with China is only around 3%. And most Taiwanese want status quo now and tend to more independence in future. It matters because China slowly realizes that peaceful unification with Taiwan might not be possible, since the Taiwanese identity as well anti-mainland China feeling is growing steadily. I think there are 3 scenarios that China can undertake to achieve their goal of unification. First one is soft power, secondly partial annexation, and thirdly, worst case scenario is full invasion. In case of soft power, first scenario, I think we should see also that China is using bribery and influencing Taiwanese political and economical elites to achieve unification step by step. Second scenario, using military power to annex remote areas of Taiwan like Matsu Island, Kinmen Island, or Taiping Island, lying in the Pratas Islands, which is remote Taiwan-controlled disputed territory in South China Sea. The goal of this strategy is to use loopholes in international law and unclearness of world reaction. And therefore, also we can see that China is deeply following how and when US and particularly European Union reacted to Georgia invasion, Crimea annexation, and most recently Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And I think there is a lot of learning, particularly for European Union, from these cases. And the third scenario, which is the worst case scenario, full-scale invasion, I think this is the worst case scenario also for China, because Taiwanese defense system is strong enough now to prevent full-scale landings and strong enough to buy time for US and the rest of the world to react. I think also that China is fearing of domestic reaction because the state is very authoritarian but very, very nationalistic. And also the fears of China is that they can lose the war and they can be isolated economically. That's the place for European Union, because I do believe that China needs EU more than EU needs China, in fact, because of economical relation. Shortly talking about the US position, what the US wants, from my point of view, they would like to keep China in check, and they would like to prefer status quo or with Taiwan, selling arms to Taiwan and building regional alliances with regional superpowers like India, Japan, and local powers like Vietnam, South Korea, and Taiwan. So, what European Union should do? European Union is really economical superpower, but military dwarf. I think the weakness of European Union is a very, very slow reaction speed, and that can help China to invade without consequences. But even though EU should hold firm with cooperation with US and push for freedom of navigation act. I think EU should make clear that invasion will economically hurt China, and slowly and steadily EU should build relation with Taiwan up to the point of possible future full recognition. I think that every player prefers status quo with slow changes towards its goals. The Taiwan is more than ever heading to possible future independence, which I believe from long-term perspective is inevitable. The role of EU is to make clear, readable policies for all players that conflict will be costly and should be avoided. Therefore, I'm absolutely sure that EU needs to play a more significant role in the area and be more tough towards Chinese claims, not give up, and not give up even for Chinese 2049 goals. Now it's more than ever before time to talk about bilateral investments agreement, about cooperation, for example, in economical terms, like in digital area and green technologies. What are the priorities for European economic recovery? And also the potential cooperation I can see in health area, particularly after COVID crisis, because perception of Taiwan in the European Union is probably the most positive ever in European Union now. And of course, to support international organization membership, particularly WHO, this is our continuous work. Our continuous work is keeping people-to-people contacts, which is some challenge now with COVID crisis. But anyway, I think there is plenty of room for cooperation, and I do believe we will work on that. And I'd like to stress out my all support to Taiwan. And if the headline of this conference is Bridge Over Troubled Water, based on Simon and Garfunkel's song, I remember another song, which is Sound of Silence. I do believe that this Sound of Silence will take longer in this beautiful part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Štefanec, for this very clear presentation and expressing your views on the role of the EU and what the EU could do in this situation. We will move now to our second speaker, Dr. Ketty Chen. Dr. Ketty Chen is the Vice President of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, and she previously was Acting Director of the Department of International Affairs of the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, in Taiwan. The Taiwan Foundation for Democracy primary concern are to further consolidate Taiwan democratic system, to support democratization in Asia, and work with the international community, including civil society and political parties, to strengthen democracy in the world. Dr. Chen is a political scientist by training. He specialized in comparative politics, democratization, international relations, and political philosophy. Her research focuses on democratization, Taiwan electoral politics, and the control methods of authoritarian regime. Dr. Chen, the floor is yours for 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Taipei. It's very wonderful to see all my friends from Brussels. And I would like to thank the European Institute of Asian Studies for this invitation so I could speak a little bit about what's happening in Taiwan after the passage of the Hong Kong version of the national security law in Hong Kong. I think what I will do is from observation on the ground in Taiwan, tell the audience and the panelists a bit about what's been happening in Taiwan and regarding Taiwan's democracy, democratic development, and hopefully express some of my personal opinions of garnering support from Taiwan's international friends of shared values in the near future. So I think the influence by Taiwan's giant neighbor across the strait did not really start in recent years. However, in the past 2 years, we actually have observed the stepping up of influence operation, invoking disinformation to influence Taiwan's domestic politics from China. Actually, last week, there is a civic organization called the Information Operation Research Group published a 140-page report detailing the methods and behavior of Chinese disinformation in Taiwan through social media, through talking heads on TV, on social media. So I really strongly recommend the audience and those who are interested to read this report. I could share the link for that report later. So when it comes to Taiwanese democracy, there was a very important local election in 2018, which served as one of the testing grounds of information operation and influence operation from China. However, the very vibrant civil societies in Taiwan very much pull together and quickly develop strategies and come up with plans to, for example, creating online or community lessons for Taiwanese citizens, and also civil societies in Taiwan collaborated with Taiwanese government in order to establish media literacy lessons, also going to communities to trying to promote the fact that people, when they receive information on social media, that they need to be very careful of what they're receiving. Therefore, Taiwan actually has effectively dealt with the situation of disinformation, but that is not to say that the issues doesn't continue. It's still a very serious problem within Taiwan's democracy when it comes to influence operation and information manipulation in Taiwanese news media. And then in addition to that, there was strong attempts to poach Taiwan's democratic allies in the past few years. In addition to that, the blocking of Taiwan from participating in international organizations. All these are behaviors and efforts to try to influence and strike on Taiwanese confidence when it comes to Taiwanese support of its democracy, and in turn perhaps introducing another alternative of authoritarian regime for the Taiwanese. Actually, the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, in the past 2 weeks, we published one of the most recent survey that we conducted on Taiwanese people's perception on democratic institutions. And here I would like to share some of the numbers with you. TFD actually commissioned the election study from the National Zhengzhi University for this really important project. When you ask Taiwanese if you excuse me, if you agree with the statement that when it comes to democracy, that when it comes to democracy, there are some existing problems. That democratic system is not perfect, but it is still the very best political system that we have. Over 80% of the Taiwanese agree with that statement. And when you ask Taiwanese people about their perception on the future of Taiwanese democracy, 63% of them said that they're optimistic about the future of Taiwan's democracy, compared to 43% of last year. So when we conduct Taiwanese perception on democracy, there is really a drastic increase of feeling positive and supporting democracy within the Taiwanese population. My personal interpretation of this number is that since the beginning of last year, that China's President Xi proposed that the only way Taiwan is to unify with China is through the one country, two system framework. That is strongly rejected by the overall population of Taiwan. President Tsai also said that Taiwanese will never accept the framework of one country, two system. And according to President Tsai, and this is the consensus of the Taiwanese. So especially younger generation in Taiwan, they are paying a lot of attention of what's going on in Hong Kong in the past year. Therefore, Taiwanese are not only positive about its own democracy, but it is very supportive of its democracy as well. We also asked a very interesting question that we asked in the past 3 years. That is, if China used military threat against Taiwan in order to unify with Taiwan, will you be willing to fight for your country? In the past 3 years, the number is usually around 70%, but in 2020, the number actually increased 10% to 80%. So we're really clear that Taiwanese population is very interested in safeguarding Taiwan's democratic way of life. As the previous speaker has mentioned, Taiwanese willing desire to maintain the status quo. My personal opinion of being in Taiwan and speaking to Taiwanese, especially young people, is that they really treasure the kind of freedom and democracy, the values that Taiwan has. And Taiwanese democracy is very well entrenched in the current identity. So as the moderator mentioned, that Taiwan and China has been floating apart in the past for quite a while, and you see the trend really continued. So this is what's been happening in Taiwan. And when it comes to just a little bit about Taiwan's combating the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's also through democratic institutions, transparency, collaboration with civil society members, with Taiwanese government that made Taiwan's effort in combating the COVID-19 pandemic very successful. Taiwan has its digital minister, Ms. Audrey Tang. She and civil society members constructed applications to allow citizens to know where in the pharmacies are facial masks available. And the administration also made Taiwan the second largest mask producing country in just a few months. And as of today, Taiwan has donated 51 million masks to 80 plus countries around the world. So I really think that the contribution of Taiwan in the international community and global arena is unquestionable. So I think my personal comments and recommendation is that in the past month, the president of the Czech Senate led a very successful delegation of 89 members to Taiwan, which invoked threats from China. However, the members of the European Union stood up against this kind of intimidation from authoritarian regimes, I really encourage democracies and partners of shared values to continue standing up for authoritarian threats and to support democracy worldwide and a democracy like Taiwan. And I think lastly, last week President Tsai spoke at the Prague Forum 2000 conference, where she asked support for democratic countries worldwide. And Forum 2000's Coalition for Democratic Renewal also issue a statement in support of Taiwan's democracy. I personally would like to see that coming from other European countries in the near future, because Taiwan is capable and willing to contribute to the international community, and especially working with the European friends. I'll stop right here and then answer some questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chen, for this nice presentation covering the measures and the activities from China to put pressure on Taiwan, and also giving a broad overview on your activities and Taiwanese position with regard to democracy and the position of the Taiwanese population with regard to democratic values. The EU and Taiwan are like-minded partners, and certainly the EU and Taiwan do share those values of democracy, human rights, and good governance. We're going to move to the third speaker, Dr. Mathieu DUCHATEL, who is the director of the Asia program at the Institut Montaigne in Paris since January 2019. Before joining the Institut Montaigne, he was a senior policy fellow and deputy director of the Asia and China program at the European Council of Foreign Relations, ECFR, and also a senior researcher and the representative in Beijing of SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. He has also been associate researcher based in Taipei with the Asia Center, the French Asia Center. Dr. DUCHATEL holds a PhD in political science from Sciences Po in Paris and has spent a total of 9 years in Shanghai, Taipei, and Beijing. And he has been working also at the Japan Institute of International Affairs. As was mentioning in my presentation, that according to SIPRI, many countries have provided or supplied weapons and arms to Taiwan since 1950. Maybe as a former SIPRI member, you may add a few information on that aspect of the relation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for having me at the seminar. SIPRI indeed has excellent databases regarding military expenditure and arms transfers, which are completely based on open source research, and I indeed would advise to use this open source material as much as possible. But my presentation today is in fact going to dig a little bit deeper in one aspect that was already mentioned by Mr. Štefanec. And I will give you an analytical presentation of the risk of military coercion of Taiwan, asking the question, is this a realistic scenario looking ahead? And I just want to start with definitions, the definition of military coercion, which I think for the sake of the discussion should be opposed to full-scale invasion of Taiwan. So military coercion understood as military actions with limited political goals and with a crisis exit scenario that would be initiated by China as a rational choice to advance its Taiwan policy agenda. I think some of these scenarios have already been mentioned by Mr. Štefanec. They are well known in reality, and some Taiwanese defense papers recently mentioned these scenarios. They can include, for example, encroaching upon Taiwan's airspace and maritime domain. I will go a little bit deeper into the air operations that the PLA Air Force has been conducting in the Taiwan Strait and around Taiwan. A little bit later, I'm speaking here of doing more than that and actually getting closer to the coast of Taiwan's main islands. They can include cyber attacks on various targets in Taiwan. They can include, as was mentioned by Mr. Štefanec, seizing one of the outlying islands. And there's been a lot of discussion in the past 2 to 3 months regarding the possibility that China, the PLA, or other organizations linked to the PLA, such as the Maritime militia, might undertake an operation against the Pratas Island. And you can even think of other scenarios, such as strikes against Taiwan, against specific targets in Taiwan. I don't want to go into this scenario. This is not the purpose of my presentation today. I just want to point out that they are all extremely risky, and there's no guarantee that taking such actions would not lead to an escalation with the Taiwanese military and possibly with the United States. I just would like to argue here that this question of military coercion is obviously very much debated in Taiwan. And during my recent exchanges with defense and security experts from Taiwan, I have had the impression that their full energy was directed at the risk of a major conflict in the Taiwan Strait, at the exclusion of these more limited actions that the PLA could take against Taiwan, because they hold the view that such actions, such limited actions, would in fact be counterproductive, because they would drive Taiwanese public opinion and Taiwanese policies, the policies of the Tsai administration, further away from China's political goals, and that it would be way too risky for China to create the conditions for Taiwan to actually declare independence. So there is the view that I think is prevailing. I have not conducted a poll, but my qualitative assessment is that the prevailing view is that such limited operations against Taiwan would be assessed in Beijing as too risky, counterproductive, and so they are brushed away as possible scenarios for the next coming years. But I just want, for the sake of this discussion, to examine the counter-arguments. I think there are some counter-arguments and some reason to worry that such operations could be conducted in the future. And I think there are 3 main reasons. Number one is that China is actually already conducting military coercion against Taiwan. The past 2 months have been particularly interesting and revealing in that regard. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry, until very recently, refused to disclose data on the PLA Air Force operations crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait, or conducting patrols or various training missions in the southwest part of Taiwan's air defense identification zone in the Bashi Channel that separates Taiwan from the Philippines. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry was communicating very selectively on such operations, commenting on particular incidents that had occurred. But because these incidents have been seriously increasing in numbers and in intensity, the Taiwanese Defense Ministry changed its communication, and we learned from the Defense Ministry that in 2020, the Taiwanese Air Force had to scramble more than 1,700 times, including 76 times for PLA Air Force crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait. This is very interesting because before that number was released to the wider public, if you looked only on open source material from the media, the number you would get, aggregating together everything you could find from all the various media reports regarding security in the Taiwan Strait, the numbers that was 4. The media had only reported about 4 instances of the PLA Air Force crossing the median line, but in reality, the number is closer to 80. China is already exerting very significant pressure over Taiwan for reasons that are both tactical from a military perspective. This is about exhausting Taiwan's air defense. This is about collecting data on the response time of the Taiwanese Air Force, the various capacities of Taiwanese radar installations. So there is a tactical dimension in these operations. This is about building China's military advantage over Taiwan, but there is also an obvious political element, which I think could be summarized as, shaping the opinion in Taiwan and the international community that everything that Taiwan does to deepen its relations with the United States and with the international community will have a cost and will be met with an increase of military pressure. So argument number 1, China is already doing it. Argument number 2, I think that if you observe what has been China's modus operandi in its maritime disputes over the past, let's say, 5 years, it's quite clear to me that it follows a path or a standard modus operandi, which can be summarized as changing gradually the status quo by extending progressively China's effective administrative control. That is what China has been doing in the South China Sea by building the artificial islands in the Spratly and expanding its Coast Guard presence. That is what China has been doing to Japan over the Senkaku-Diaoyu dispute with major deployments or very frequent deployments of Coast Guards in the territorial sea and in the contiguous zone around the islands. And this is, presented in China as a domestic political win. But Xi Jinping, and if you read the reports, the work reports of Xi Jinping to the 19th Party Congress of 2017, I think it's on page 2 that he makes very clear that one major win for China during the 18th Central Committee, his first term as leader, has been the gradual expansion of Chinese control over the South China Sea. I think that people should pay attention to the Chinese thinking regarding air operations in the southwest corner of Taiwan in the Bashi Channel, because I would argue that these operations should be understood in light of that tactical approach to territorial conflicts in terms of gradually expanding control. And that's how I would also analyze the decision, in fact, by Beijing, not by Hong Kong, to not let the Taiwanese regular flight pass through the Hong Kong airspace to land in the Pratas Island. This is an issue of expanding administrative control and shrinking Taiwanese actual administrative control over the space it effectively administers. And number 3, and I think it's maybe the most powerful argument to the possibility that coercion operations might be conducted against Taiwan, is the fact that the alternative to military pressure as an option for China to conduct its Taiwan policy is no longer really there. It used to be, and it was I would say the political architecture of the cross-strait relationship since Lian Zhan's 2005 visit to Beijing, and this very important turning point in cross-strait relations, the political architecture was that the Kuomintang was always an alternative to the current DPP administration in terms of cross-strait policy, based on the idea that what the Kuomintang could offer was a deepening of Taiwan's economic growth based on economic integration with China. This was what the Kuomintang was offering, let's say, from 2005 to 2016. The problem is that this approach is no longer credible in the current context of US-China trade war, in the current context of reshoring of Taiwanese companies away from mainland China. China is not fully considered as, a space for growth for Taiwanese companies. And this argument that was the strength of the Taiwanese opposition, and that could be used by China to offer incentives to the Taiwanese population, and especially the business community, has severely weakened. And I think that's the reason why Beijing has treated the Kuomintang in such a humiliating way during the cross-strait forum that took place in September in Xiamen, with a commentary by the anchor of CCTV and in China that argued that the Kuomintang was coming to beg for peace, which is a sign that there is not a very strong interest in Beijing at this stage to actually work with the Kuomintang to provide, to build the foundations for cross-strait rapprochement and build the foundations for economic integration and political integration. It's no longer something that is taken as a credible alternative in Beijing, and as a result, it increases the importance of military pressure as an option on China's toolbox. Let me make a few points to conclude this analysis. I would say first, escalation in the direction that I have described, limited military coercion operations, is a possibility, but it's certainly not certain. It's not certain. This is really about the assessment in Beijing regarding costs and benefits. I think that Taiwan has some space to influence this assessment. The US has also has more space to influence this assessment, but we have to be clear that stakeholders in Europe also do have some space to influence the assessment in Beijing of the costs and the benefits of using military coercion against Taiwan. Point number two, I think that January 2021 will be a key date to understand what is coming next on China's playbook. This will be obviously after the US presidential election. We will know a little bit more about the direction of US-Taiwan relations at that time. January is the month when China traditionally has its Taiwan World Conference. I think this will be the time when decisions will be taken regarding deep policy options that China has to influence the course of cross-strait relations. And my third concluding point is that this period of military pressure against Taiwan that we have been through in the past few months is really about attempting to close what has been a window of opportunity for Taiwan. I think it's very remarkable for someone, for people who follow cross-strait relations, that the current international environment is now, has evolved to the point that we no longer talk about Taiwan only in terms of, binary choices between unification and independence, conflict or peace, democracy and authoritarianism. Of course, these are the structuring elements of the security equation in the Taiwan Strait. But what has really appeared on the agenda since 2019 are two issues that have been brought to the forefront and that have been presenting Taiwan with a huge opportunity. First, clearly, and Dr. Chen has mentioned it, is the fact that Taiwan has been extremely successful in the health crisis management of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that Taiwan can provide very important lessons of good governance for other democracies and open societies, and that this has really created some space for Taiwan in the international community to be discussed, not only from an angle of, from the traditional angles that were dominating the discussions regarding the Taiwan Strait, especially in Europe. So this has been a very positive development. And the second issue is the key position of Taiwan in the information and communications technology supply chains, which is an area that now is central in the US-Taiwan relationship. And I observe here that the Europeans are having a separate discussion regarding the resilience of their supply chains, and we talk mostly about medical supplies, healthcare, but also partly about, you know, we are having a parallel discussion to the discussions that are taking place in the US, in Asia, and for which Taiwan is a very central element of the conversation. I think that this area, the question of the resilience of supply chain, is also bringing Taiwan to the forefront of the policy discussions and open space for European countries and for the EU to actually develop relations with Taiwan in a way that is not purely, you know, about, or that is indirectly about security in the Taiwan Strait. And I think this is a good opportunity that should be seized and explored further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathieu DUCHATEL, for this very, very well-informed analysis of the military solution or military actions or alternatives for the Chinese side. And it's not too optimistic, but it's quite realistic, and was extremely useful to have this perspective on the security dilemmas of the Taiwan Strait. Thank you for the three speakers for their presentation. We'll now move to the Q&A session, and we have received a few questions already. I will start with questions for Dr. Chen. On the there are two questions which I would like to ask you and seek your comments. The first one, is there any cooperation between the Chinese and Taiwanese civil society organization in general, and also from the democratic point of view? And the second one, which is a little bit linked, the US, of course, is a strong ally of Taiwan. The EU is supporting Taiwan. What about the other democracy in the region, like Japan and South Korea? Do they provide clear support to Taiwan, or are they keeping some distance because China is so close to them?
Thank you very much for the questions. So when it comes to collaboration between Chinese and Taiwanese civil societies or NGOs, they were some are very active and assisting each other. And because the common language, it's easier for Taiwanese NGOs and civil society members to work with the Chinese side. Mostly, a lot of the non-governmental organizations work on issues relating to health, poverty, environment. However, with the passage and execution of the foreign NGO law and now the national security law in Hong Kong, most of these activities had ceased or went very discreet. So these national legislation from the People's Republic of China really infringe on the communications and collaboration between Taiwanese and Chinese civil societies. So and when it comes to support of other democracies for Taiwan, Japan has been very supportive. Former Prime Minister Modi came to Taiwan to attend the funeral of Taiwan's former president, Li Denghui, or he was named or dubbed Mr. Democracy for Taiwan. And former Prime Minister Modi actually came to Taiwan twice, when Mr. Li first passed away, and also to come for his eventual memorial with a delegation from Japan and LDP members. So South Korea has a Korea Foundation for Democracy. So a lot of civil society activities between Taiwan and Korea. So I think Taiwan really has some of very strong democratic partners in the region. But the Taiwanese administration and Taiwanese people are seeking more. I just want to leave with some thoughts that when democracies speak out for other democracies, and especially for Taiwan, it boosts the confidence of the Taiwanese people that they are not alone, and that there are democratic allies that are in support of them. So it also further strengthens them to trying to combat and deal or weather the authoritarian influence that happens in Taiwan and Taiwanese societies every day. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. I'm told that you have to leave soon, but there's still one more question, which I would like to ask. Well, that the public has been asking, which is addressed to the three speakers, but maybe you can be the first one to answer. The question is that President Xi Jinping said that Taiwan issue cannot pass from one generation to the next generation. So do you think that President Xi has a sense of urgency to resolve between brackets, Taiwan issue when he seeks a third-term power into 2022? So please, what are your views about this sense of urgency to move forward to reunification? And after your answer, maybe Mr. Štefanec and Dr. DUCHATEL can also give their views on that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. While I cannot get inside of President Xi's head and figure out his thought process of whether he thought that Taiwan is an issue to be resolved very urgently. I think very importantly, Taiwan's democracy and the future of the Taiwanese people should not be considered as an issue. So when it comes to Mr. Xi, I have no doubt that he has his own plans and legacies to fulfill. So therefore, perhaps pressuring Taiwan and making strong attempts to influence Taiwanese democracy or to erode the Taiwanese people's confidence of their democratic elected leader is part of the plan. However, I really think that the people of Taiwan really have been doing a wonderful job as a democratic society or member of the international community. So I just think that I am unsure if this is what he thought would be part of his legacy. However, I really think that the future of Taiwan should be left to be decided by the people of Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very clear. The future of Taiwanese people should not be considered as an issue. Do our two other panelists have something to add to this on this specific question? Would you like, Mr. Štefanec?
Yeah, thank you very much. And the answer is yes, it might be seen as a real threat, because I see that Xi Jinping would like to create his own legacy. So therefore, it is a real threat. Now, China has a lot of own problems connected with health crisis, connected also with the situation worldwide. So I think this is the threat which can be used as his basically his excuse and his try to reinforce his position.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. DUCHATEL?
I'm happy to add a few points on this. I think that, number one, I would expect Taiwan to really feature prominently on the top of China's political agenda during the 20th Central Committee after the party congress, the next party congress in 2022. You could argue that Xi Jinping's first term in office, strategically in the region, was very much focused on the South China Sea. Second term in office was very much focused on changing the status quo in Hong Kong, and the third term will see more efforts to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. My second point is really reinforcing Dr. Chen's view that it's very difficult to have quality information regarding what are the current discussions in Beijing regarding all areas of foreign policy. There are many examples. For example, people are still debating why China has been initiating border clashes with India. You don't have a very clear explanation. And this is about the change in the decision-making process with a very strong effort not to let the international community understand what are the plans, what are the next moves, why is China taking the actions that it is taking. This is part of the what can be described as a Leninist approach to decision-making. And this is a problem actually for cross-strait relations and for understanding the Taiwan policy of China. If you compare now to 4 or 5 years earlier, I think we have much less clues into what is the current thinking in Beijing regarding relations of Taiwan. And this really complicates the analysis and the policy response. And my third point would be that Taiwanese defense posture is quite robust. And this is a very important element which we have not yet touched upon in this discussion, that there are elements of Taiwanese defense posture that constitute a serious deterrence against any military actions that China would consider as policy options. A lot, of course, depends on the posture of the United States. That's certain. There were discussions earlier this year regarding, the November election, actually next week, constituting a window of opportunity for China to exert stronger pressure over Taiwan if there was a disputed outcome to the vote. But overall, I don't see this as a very likely scenario. But I think that the robustness of Taiwanese deterrence and the robustness of the US deterrence will be the central element for Xi Jinping to make his decisions regarding whether an action can be taken to transform the status quo in the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you very much for those additional comments. I would like to come back a little bit to the European Union and to the role of the European Union and the European Parliament. We know that the EU adheres to its one China policy while maintaining economic and cultural contacts with Taiwan, many contacts, trade contacts with Taiwan, but there is still the one China policy. Should the EU engage more in supporting democratic Taiwan? And someone from the public is asking if there is any possibility for the European Parliament to issue a strong statement on Taiwan sovereignty. And there is also another question which is linked to that, is the fact that with the human rights violations in China, could the EU take into consideration sanction on China? Would that be an option? Maybe or two speakers, starting with Mr. Štefanec, member of the European Parliament, you could give us the views on those points. And the European Parliament, as you mentioned, has been issuing many different resolutions and reports on Taiwan. But does it have any impact on China, and does it have any impact on Taiwan participation in international organization? So those is a family of questions on the same subject. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for those questions, very important ones. You are absolutely right that European Parliament is still very, very active in this issue, but honestly, with limited impact. We have to understand also that this decision-making process in the European Union, basically, it is kind of trialogue between European Parliament, European Commission, and European Council. Traditionally, in European Parliament, there are more pro-Taiwanese forces, simply saying. European Commission is, based on the pressure from the Parliament, is also moving towards slightly, I would say, pro-Taiwanese position. I'm positive about it, based on my observation how Mr. Borrell, the highest representative for foreign affairs and Vice President of European Commission, how he reacted to our pressure, particularly this year. But thirdly, European Council is not moving, we have to say, because European Council, as basically the representative body of the governments of member states, still there is a lot of different interests, there are a lot of politics, and we cannot expect also any move from a short-term perspective. But we will keep this pressure. This pressure is continuous. Just I can give you example that recently our political group, European People's Party, which is actually the strongest group in the European Parliament, issued the policy paper about EU-Chinese relations, which is, I would say, very good and very strong, stronger than before. And there are included also question regarding Taiwan's issue. This is some step ahead. If question is if there will be new resolution about Taiwan sovereignty in European Parliament, I cannot say yes now, but I can say there is a stronger chance, based on current developments, stronger chance to do so, because also, as I said before, European Parliament, basically, as the Parliament consists currently of 705 deputies from 27 countries. There is very strong EU-Taiwanese group, and a lot of good resolutions have been adopted. So I would say growing chance to do so, and definitely I'm absolutely sure there will be continuous pressure from European Parliament to Commission and also to Council to act. Second question was about some sanctions on China's products. Let me start answering this question also with say soft diplomacy. That's what we can do in the European Union. As I said, the European Union is economical power, but security dwarf. But we can have some diplomatic tools, and we use it. Those diplomatic tools can be to reward somebody, but to impose sanctions on the products, because everybody outside EU would like to sell products and services on the EU market. That's probably the strongest tool what we have in the hand to impose duties and sanctions on the countries which would like to sell products and services on the European market. And we are doing so. For example, we imposed increased duties on steel products coming from China, which were clearly dumped products. And now it is under discussion to impose sanctions on products which were produced under the conditions where human rights are not kept. Another issue which is being discussed is environmental sanctions on Chinese products, because as we know, European Union is heading towards new environmental standards with the objective to create carbon neutral economy by 2050. And European Union will put more and more pressure for non-European countries to keep the same environmental standards, also by applying environmental duties. That will be a new tool which will be also tackled to many countries, and particularly I think this is the threat for China. Last but not least, as I said that we use this soft diplomacy, I'd like to mention that we have also awarded Mr. Tohti, who is basically economist and activist, and currently he is Uyghur in a Chinese prison. We awarded him by Sakharov Prize, which definitely attracted more attention to the human rights issues in China, and we will use all the tools what we have in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. DUCHATEL. Do you want to say something about those sanctions, and maybe add also something about the possible or potential military role of the EU in terms of arms sales, or any role that the EU could play in hard security in the region?
I can try and add some elements to what Mr. Štefanec said. I think we should have realistic expectations when thinking about the role that Europe plays and can play in the Taiwan Strait. There are indeed, Mr. Štefanec very politely mentioned the European Council. There are countries within the European Union that are completely opposed to the possibility that Europe should say more, Europe should do more. But this does not mean, I mean, this is clearly an obstacle for Taiwan in its attempt to deepen ties with the European Union. But this does not mean that nothing can be done at all. I would tend to think that we should think relations with Taiwan in terms of contributing to the balance in the Taiwan Strait, and combat the argument that you hear from time to time in Europe that anything that is being done with Taiwan will in fact have a counterproductive effect on Taiwan's security because this provokes China too much. That's certainly not the way this is understood and seen by the person who are the most directly concerned by that issue of security, which are the people of Taiwan. And I think they see very realistically, any densification of the interactions between Taiwan and Europe as something that strengthens Taiwan in its attempt to maintain the status quo in the Taiwan Strait and preserve its political system and its societal model from the policy of unification conducted by Beijing. So think of deepening relations with Taiwan in terms of contributing to the balance. And there are areas that provide opportunities for densifying relations with Taiwan. I think supply chains, I have mentioned it in my conclusion, are an issue that is emerging on the political agendas of many European countries. And the Commission, this creates some space. This is about reducing our dependence on China's industrial power and building supply chains that are resilient to various shocks, including attempts at political leverage. That's something that should be explored. I think that the Commission and member states with an interest and an ambition to play a positive role in the Taiwan Strait should also engage in a very serious thinking regarding what are the coercion scenarios in the Taiwan Strait and what would be a European answer, not to be taken off guard if this happens in the future. For example, I have not done that, but if you ask the question to a key policymaker in the External Action Service or in the Commission or among the Asia policy people of key European member states, if you ask them what will be the response of Europe in case there is a crisis over the Pratas Island, I don't think that there is much thinking that has gone into that, and I think that everything that helps deepen our understanding of the possibilities for the future, in fact, will help the cause of stability and peace, and in reducing the space for unilateral action to be taken by China in the Taiwan Strait. I think that this should be the kind of guiding principle for European planning and action in the Taiwan Strait, reducing the space for unilateral action.
Thank you. And to continue on that, maybe to reduce the space for further action, is there an opportunity for the EU to work with other countries like the US or Australia on Chinese issues? Who wants to answer to that?
If I may shortly comment that, definitely yes. The answer is yes. I see really room for opportunity and room for improvement. Just putting Taiwanese issue on the table as the separate point, for example, for EU-US relations, and I think there is also potential cooperation between EU and US in this term. Generally, it was already said today, but I'd like to highlight it. Generally, democratic world should cooperate much more, because if there is any threat to any democracy, any democratic country, we should not leave it as it is. So we should cooperate much closer in democratic world.
Thank you, Dr. DUCHATEL.
This is already happening, and this will depend in the coming years. There has been, despite the tensions in transatlantic relations during the Trump administration, in fact, some convergence between the US and Europe over some very central issues to our relations with China. I'm thinking of, for example, technology transfers, investment screening, the trade agenda, the way we assess, in fact, the political trajectory of China during the second term of Xi Jinping. This has been, in fact, an area of closer transatlantic ties in the larger picture of tensions in the transatlantic relations. And I'm going to give you maybe something that can amount as a French answer to regarding the other large democracies. I think that in the past 5 years, there has been clearly much more emphasis placed on deepening our relations with India, Australia, and Japan. And this has resulted in a policy towards Asia. We now use the language Indo-Pacific to also place India into that picture and the Indian Ocean. This has been a very significant rebalancing of the French foreign policy, which used to be extremely centered on relations with China. But since relations with China are so difficult to conduct, and it's so difficult to identify what can be a positive agenda for cooperation, we disagree on many issues, and we focus much more on defending, on a defensive agenda. This is also true at the European level. I think that this convergence on the China policy of the United States, Western Europe, India, Japan, Australia is in fact bound to continue and to deepen as the political trajectory that has been China's since the second term of Xi Jinping will remain the same in his third term. So yes, I see this as having potential for deepening indeed.
Thank you very much. And I think it's about time we conclude this session. And I think the two conclusions which were given a few minutes ago about the need to increase collaboration between like-minded countries, especially when the EU 2 years ago has called China a systemic rival. It's very important for the like-minded country to defend the same values and to cooperate and develop their relations. And of course, as Mr. Štefanec was saying, it's very important to defend all the democracies in the world, because if we don't support one democracy, all the other ones may suffer from it. So I wish to thank the three of you, Dr. Chen, Mr. Štefanec, and Dr. DUCHATEL, for their very interesting presentations and also the answer you provided to the questions. And thank to the participants for all the questions we have received for this first event online. I think it did work rather well. And I think we will have a short break for 5 to 10 minutes before we move to the second panel. But I give the floor to Lynn Goethals to inform the participants of the next step. Thank you very much for your participation and attention.
Thank you very much indeed. So basically we will have a short break now until 11 o'clock, and then we'll start with the second panel. But first of all, I would really like to thank you all, the speakers, for the first panel, for all the discussions and for all the questions as well. So now I would like to invite the speakers of the second panel to join us also online and to start at 11. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning to all my distinguished panelists, and also good morning to everybody who joined us this morning and is looking forward to the debate that we are about to start. My name is Serge Sobans, and I am Senior Associate at the European Institute for Asian Studies. But I'm also an international security expert with a security and defense background. And this background pushes me to a double analysis of the topic of today's discussion and the situation in the South China Sea, but also situation in the broader region, and also the global impact of this situation. You know, from a military or security perspective, I think it's the first time in modern history that a regional power able to leave their shores and project power and project military assets also up to the first defense line in the Pacific, and doing so without any form of real opposition or combat. So it's basically a power projection, but it's also some kind of military success without even entering combat. And a second approach would, of course, be more geopolitic or regional, when we look at China not negotiating regionally the different disputes in the South China Sea, but engaging in bilateral discussions with its neighbors, and of course influencing each of those neighbors. What we see there is clearly expand, or I would say, the economic or projection of the economic power, also some forms of military powers, and power is still a form of influence used to counterparts to basically force them to follow your own will or your own plan. So what we are witnessing at the moment in the perils of the South China Sea, is this a regional issue? Is this a global issue? Why would it be so important for Europe? Those are basically the questions that we need to ask ourselves today and try to find I would say answers to. We can also put this in a broader geopolitical perspective, and you know, with my background, I need to think about strategists like Mahan or Mackinder that would oppose styles of power and influence projection, of course, one through the control of the land masses and the other one through the control of the sea masses. So are we witnessing today a nascent global player that will also, for the first time in modern history, be able to control both, or to influence both the land and the sea masses? So those are basically the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Are we witnessing here development and maximization of the different pillars of power, going from capacities to the economy and the military pillar of power? Is this done with a clear strategic plan and a strong political will to also execute the plan? So I'm really looking forward to the presentations and also to the debate that is going to discuss these questions, or the topic at stake this morning. but also this more regional and international geopolitical perspectives. So we have 4 distinguished panelists who joined us this morning, and I will introduce panelist per panelist as they will take the floor. So the first panelist to take the floor is the member of the European Parliament, Mrs. Anna Fotyga. Mrs. Anna Fotyga started her career with the Solidarity Trade Union, that is also known as Solidarność in Poland. From 2000 to 2001, she was the advisor to the Prime Minister on International Affairs and also Director of Foreign Affairs Department, the Office of the Polish Prime Minister. Since 2001, she is a member of the Law and Justice Party, PiS. She has been a deputy mayor of Minsk from 2000 to 2004 and also a member of the Polish Parliament from 2011 to 2014. Mrs. Fotyga has also held different positions in several national governments. So from 2005 to 2006, she was a state secretary and Minister of Foreign Affairs. She was a Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2007. In the same period, also the chair of the Committee on European Integration. From 2007 to 2008, you were the head of the Office of the President of the Republic of Poland. And from 2006 to 2010, member of the National Security Council in Poland. In Parliament, you work in several committees, especially the Committee on Foreign Affairs and also the Subcommittee on Security and Defense. So, Mrs. Fotyga, we are really honored to have you this morning, and I give the floor for your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I'm really privileged to attend this panel with outstanding experts. I'm, as you read, I'm a politician with a long-standing career, so I'm rather used to interventions, not presentations, formal presentations. But allow me to present some of my personal experience on activity in international fora and observations concerning the attention given to the region. In previous legislature of the European Parliament, I used to chair a subcommittee on security and defense. And during this time, 5 years, until 2019, we were able to present a security situation in around Southeast China Sea, and in particular, rise of China and new threats posed by this important actor. We were able to host personalities like Mrs. Paisova, by the way, very much benefiting from her extensive knowledge. Actually, European Parliament for many years already used to raise the issue of China. From Polish perspective, it is always very interesting to monitor developments. When we speak about current posture of China, we have to bear in mind the famous statements by Deng Xiaoping, hide your strength. So the step-by-step gaining of strength by China and variety of policies used vis-a-vis own people internally, including minorities like Uyghurs nowadays. It's a long-standing experience in the country. Also, certain posture vis-a-vis Taiwan, because after and now, in particular, after imposition of the national security law and earlier extradition law on Hong Kong, that was so audible, so much public in world democracies in both NATO member states, allies, and EU member states. It raised particular alert in Taiwan because actually, and rightly so, the actions taken against Hong Kong were read by Taiwanese as a warning signal about possibility even to aim at invasion of the islands. Actually, until the and autocratic move of China, it was publicly perceived that eventuality of invasion is highly improbable because, first of all, of the military capabilities that were at China's disposal, and secondly, because of eventual international reaction to this kind of event. Now we had the possibility to observe the reaction to Hong Kong events, although the moves of China, atrocities imposed by authorities of Hong Kong were made public, yet reaction was mild, I would say. It was mainly diplomatic, and with China exerting pressure. It was quite famous action taken by PRC vis-a-vis Czech members of Senate and government willing to visit Taiwan, and this kind of pressure unfortunately seems quite successful. In my experience, actually it starts to resemble a variety of methods of influence, pressure, and actually also methods of violence used by Russia vis-a-vis a variety of international actors, and the ways of eliminating those who used to oppose policies or projection of power, who were outspoken in a democratic world about policies. Now China, and actually it was not so much visible, starts to do the same, to use similar methods to influence international public opinion, in particular elites. Of course, there were a variety of incidents threatening Taiwanese authorities and also international actors in their endeavors to engage with Taiwan. There were numerous violations of airspace and the virtual median line in Taiwan Strait by Chinese warships. that were kind of provocations, and also accompanying, for example, the US Undersecretary of State Keith Kirch visit to Taipei and his engagement with politicians, including the President Tsai enjoying her second term in office. And these actions show quite new aggressive posture, supporting a more authoritarian move taken by Chinese PRC authorities, in particular President. And also, we see a variety of actions taken by China, being it UN or WHO in international multilateral fora, preventing Taiwan from enjoying the position in areas that the island was well known for. When we speak about WHO, we have to remember that most probably Taiwan has the best expertise in the world concerning public health, and in particular preventing epidemics. It's due also to some kind of cooperation between formerly Polish outstanding scientists and Chiang Kai-shek during the early days of current system. And actually, Taiwan probably was the only place in the world that was so successful in combating COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore experience of Taiwan is extremely valuable to all of us, in particular in the second wave of pandemics, with very unfavorable contribution from PRC in this respect. So there are many ways to accompanying projecting military power by PRC and threatening Taiwan that are detrimental not only to Taiwan but also to international community and reaction of democratic world. The EU, but also other organizations, is vital in this respect. We cannot allow China to impose its pressure on both ways of life and also routes of transport and flourishing of democracies in the region. It's without prejudice to other threats. I think that we learned this lesson. We start to engage more with like-minded countries of the region, being in NATO or the EU. We try to discuss issues. I'm happy that I was personally also able to bring this to European Parliament forum. Nowadays we have even informal groupings of MEPs, like Hong Kong Watch, that is monitoring not only the situation of Hong Kong but overall activity of PRC, also including the security aspects in the region. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Fotiga. Let's now turn to the second speaker for this session, and that's the Taiwanese representative to the EU, Dr. Ming-Yen Tsai. Dr. Ming-Yen Tsai has a PhD, also PhD from the Department of War Studies at King's College, University of London, and developed an academic career at the National Chung Sing University in Taiwan, where he eventually, after a different position as adjunct and assistant and then eventually professor, became director of the Graduate Institute of International Politics, but also director of the Center for Global Peace and Strategic Studies. He also participated as an advisory board member in the development of the Defense White Paper of the Republic of China, Taiwan. His last position before joining us here in Brussels was as the Deputy Secretary General of the National Security Council from June 2017 to July 2020. And in the same period, he was also the spokesperson of President Tsai Ing-wen's state's visits to diplomatic allies. So, Mr. Representative, we are really pleased to have you with us on the panel this morning, and we are looking forward to your intervention. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this program. So my gratitude go to the EIAS for inviting me and hosting today's webinar on a very important topic that is about the security situations in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. I think if we bundle the issues that we touch upon today altogether, we can see a very clear picture. That is, China is becoming more and more confident to challenge the status quo in its neighborhood with its growing national strengths, particularly during this very special timing when global community is preoccupied by the pandemic problems. So I would like to share my conclusion at the very beginning of my remark. That is, China has become the driving force to turn the security environment of the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea into highly uncertain and risky. So I believe Beijing has to take the full responsibility for the worsening security situation in the region. So in the following 10 or 15 minutes, I would like to share some of my views over China's strategic intentions and the policy operations toward the South China Sea. I think regarding China's strategic intentions, China not only sees the South China Sea as part of its maritime territories, but also sees the South China Sea as a very important strategic gateway and the platform for China to exercise its military muscle and then to project Chinese strategic ventures in the region so as to achieve the status as a predominant power in the Indo-Pacific. To achieve this end, we know China has been mobilizing its centralized governance system and then try to coordinate different agencies together to take all kinds of policy tools toward the South China Sea so as to promote China's de facto control over this region. I think we can go through those policy tools taken by China and then to see how China is currently doing to promote its influence in those disputed water. I think the first policy tool taken by China is to promote its military build-up in the region. We know China has built about 7 artificial islands in the South China Sea and moved so many military items like air defense system, anti-ship missile, jet fighter, and radar equipment to those artificial islands already. And more importantly, China also completed building airplane runways in 3 different artificial islands. They are Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, and Fury Coast Reef. Those airplane runways will be able to allow China to land and operate all kinds of Chinese military planes in the region, ranging from heavy bombers, jet fighters, to air refueling aircraft and the anti-submarine aircraft and many others. And what China wants to do is to make use of those kind of military equipment and facilities and build them into a kind of network to promote China's military surveillance, military patrol, and military control over this region in peacetime, and also to support China's potential decisive military operation in this region during wartime period if China chooses to do so. So what I'm saying is that the situation in the South China Sea has become quite tense. And one thing which is very worrisome would be about that China is becoming more and more confident, more and more comfortable to show its military muscle in front of the neighboring countries, even the United States. I remember in this August when the United States decided to send its aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan to patrol in the water of the South China Sea. China immediately announced to launch missile tests in the water of the South China Sea. And it's believed that the missile launched by China are DF-21D and the DF-26B, which are regarded by China as carrier killer with the capacity to strike and to destroy those moving targets in the water. So I think the message that China would like to send to the United States is very clear, more than clear. That is, United States is not supposed to step into the waters that China has strong concerns and interest. So I think we can put it in a very clear way. That is, the militarization of the South China Sea has become a reality we need to face. If we look back to the year 2012, when China's leader Xi Jinping paid his first state visit to United States, he used to promise his counterpart, US President Obama, by saying that China would never pursue militarization of the South China Sea. However, so many years have passed. It's very clear that China has broken its promise, has broken its commitment to the United States. So I think that is the reason why the United States has decided to conduct FONOP, I mean freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea water, and then to demonstrate its determination and commitment to the maintenance of the stability in Asia. So that is the first policy tour taken by China toward the South China Sea at a point. And the second policy tour taken by China will be about China's efforts to increase gray zone activity in the disputed water. Because what we are now seeing is that China has been sending more and more Coast Guard vessels and paramilitary police vessels into the disputed water in the name of doing law enforcement activities to suppress or to interfere the activities taken by foreign vessels from neighboring countries such as the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. For those Southeastern Asian countries, they do not very strong capacity to do maritime patrol or maritime surveillance. So that leaves the rooms for China to, continue to promote its de facto administrative control over the disputed water. So I think when we talk about the security situation in the South China Sea, we really need to take into account that kind of gray zone activity taken by the Chinese government in the disputed water, and then to think about how could we promote the capacity of Southeastern Asian countries surveillance or patrol operation in the disputed water, so as to have some kind of check and balance about China's gray zone activities in the region. And the third policy tour taken by the Chinese government will be about its smile diplomacy, because China has agreed to join the negotiation on Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, which is proposed by ASEAN member states. What China is now doing is to take delaying tactic, that is to prolong the negotiation process on the one hand, and on the other to speed up China's military build-up in the region, as I just addressed earlier. So what China wants to do is to show some kind of smile offense to the outside world, and then make international community mistake that the disputes over the South China Sea has been, under free will management or good discussion between China and other ASEAN member states. And that would be helpful for China to squeeze the rooms for third parties like the United States and Japan to interfere in the disputes over the South China Sea. So that's the third policy tour I found from China's operation in the region. And the fourth one will be about China's economic seducement. China has proposed, One Belt One Road initiative and promised to offer financial support to the infrastructure construction in the region. some of the ASEAN member states have quite high expectation for the economic benefit through the cooperation with China. So that would make ASEAN member states have difficulties to reach some kind of consensus or some kind of common understandings on stronger position against China's expansionism in the region. And it's always easy for China to make use of economic tools to disunite ASEAN member states, and then to prevent they cook a very strong position against China's behavior, misbehavior in the region. So in the conclusion, I want to sum up some of my observation. That is, China is already engaged in an overall expansionism in the region without making any kind of gun smoke. Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea have become the testing ground for China to exercise the operation of hybrid warfare, which include military build-up, diplomatic offense, gray zone activity, and economic seducement that I just mentioned a little bit earlier. What China wants to do is to promote its de facto political and military control over the region. So if a global community, including EU, keep away from the situation or keep silent about the challenging situation in the South China Sea, I'm afraid China would feel very comfortable to make use of this kind of model for expansion and apply it to some other corner of the globe. So that's the real situation we are now facing in Asia, and I just make use of this opportunity to share some of my concerns with our good colleagues online today. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsai, and I'm now going to pass the floor to Bill Ayton, that is an Associate Fellow for Asia Pacific Program at Chatham House. Bill Ayton is the author of 3 books on Asia. First, The Invention of China, his latest publication. Then a second book, South China Sea, The Struggle for Power in Asia. And the third book focusing on Vietnam, Rising Dragon. Bill Ayton started his career as a journalist in the Middle East and Central and Eastern Europe before starting to focus on Asia. Since about 15 years right now, you have worked for TV and radio news, most of the time with BBC News and the BBC World Service, but also other broadcasts, freelancer like TI, Al Jazeera, APTN, CNBC, Sky News, and many more. One thing that really popped out to me in your was really special to me in your CV is the fact that in 2013, for a year, you were embedded with the state broadcast of Myanmar, MR TV, and definitely there gathered a lot of experience in Asia, and especially in this country. So today, as an Associate Fellow for the Asia Pacific Program at Chatham House, Bill Ayton, we are really pleased to have you on the panel, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. It's very nice to be part of this online event, and hopefully when we have the next one, we'll all be able to be in the same room. So I'm going to follow the remarks of the previous speaker and maybe put a little more detail on some of China's recent behavior in the South China Sea. And I'm going to do that with the help of a slide. Hold on. Hang on. So I'm hoping you can all see that. So my argument really is going to be that China has, in the last few years, really established an economic veto over activities within its U-shaped line in the South China Sea. Now, the line is important, but we don't really know what it actually means. It's undefined in its precise extent. It was first drawn on a Chinese map that appeared publicly in 1948, and then a new map that was published by China, when it submitted, made a submission to the UN in 2009, had a different drawn line, but in approximately the same area. Nor do we know exactly what the meaning of this line is, and it has changed over time. But what seems true is that China currently is acting as if the line is a real maritime boundary, and that's a violation in spirit, at least, maybe even more, of the 2016 Arbitration Tribunal Award, which I'll talk about a little more in a bit. So there have been three main areas of contention in the last couple of years in the southern part of the South China Sea, all to do with countries trying to exploit oil or gas resources off their coasts, involving the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia. Also incidents involving fisheries to do with Indonesia, and possibly some disputes involving Brunei, although they've been less publicly acknowledged. So all of the Southeast Asian countries have been affected by this. And we can see how China seems to regard the U-shaped line, the 9-dash line, as a boundary by the way that it conducted an oil survey in 2019 close to the Vietnamese coast, when it came extremely close but never over the actual line here. So it seems to be that China is behaving as if this U-shaped line means something to it. Now, when there was a meeting between the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, foreign ministers with China in July last year, the Chinese representative, Mr. Wang Yi, told the ASEAN ministers that these areas where these clashes had been taking place were, in his words, disputed, but he never made clear what the basis for that dispute was. How does China claim that these areas so far away from its coastline are disputed? What legal basis does it have? We don't officially know. But let's look at what's actually been going on in a bit more detail. So in 2019, this is a map of showing the southeastern coast of Vietnam off Ho Chi Minh City, out towards Borneo and towards the Philippines, showing the different oil blocks and which companies from the Vietnamese side have the rights to exploit different bits of the seabed there. And that's a line that I've drawn in, approximating to where the Chinese U-shaped line goes in green there. You can see this here is the U-shaped line. And that survey operation in July last year, you can see, went extremely close to that line, but never actually over it. So that's one example. And then we've had another examples from this year, where the Russian company Rosneft was going to drill in this part of the sea here, Block 0601, again across the U-shaped line, and China made threats to the Vietnamese government, which forced the Rosneft drill to be cancelled. Now, the Spanish company Repsol had previously tried to drill a bit further south and east in 2017 and in 2018, and again the Vietnamese government was intimidated with threats of military force from China against that. So that's a European company, a Spanish company Repsol, and a Russian company Rosneft being intimidated out of developing offshore gas resources, in this case on behalf of Vietnam, a country which is suffering electricity shortages because of its rapid economic growth, and that's being hampered by its inability to develop its own electricity resources. And while we may, in our climate change aware era, be wondering why we're developing offshore oil and gas resources, well, the alternative for Vietnam, if it doesn't develop these gas resources, is to use Chinese-built coal-fired power stations, which will be significantly worse for the climate. Turning now to the situation off the Philippines, the map on the left is an enlarged area of the circled area on the right there. And the Philippines gets 20% of its entire national electricity generation from a gas field called Malampaya, which I've marked on the left there with the star here. A pipeline takes the gas onshore here. Now, this pipeline is due to run out, so this gas field is due to run out within 5 to 7 years. So what is the Philippines going to do for 20% of its electricity generation? The answer is not clear. and the Philippines has not been very forthcoming about what it intends to do to plug the gap. Now, just recently, well, since President Duterte came to office in 2016, there's been a veto on trying to develop offshore gas resources because, in Mr. Duterte's words, China had threatened him with war if he went ahead and authorized drilling in disputed areas. But just last week, Philippines said it was going to be allowing a joint venture to take place in this field here, the Calamian field here. This will be a joint venture between the Philippines, a Philippines company, a Singapore-based company, and a Chinese company. Now, what's important here is that this, well, you can see I've drawn in the lines. The red line here comes from the 2009 Chinese map. The green line comes from the 1947 map, so you can see that they're not in the same place. And this field appears to be just on the Philippines side of the Chinese claim line here. This ambiguous and ill-defined line. But this basically seems to take it out of the disputed area here. Much more important is what happens to much, much bigger reserves of gas, which are believed to lie under this reed bank area here. And China has threatened the Philippines with conflict if it tries to develop those reserves, even though the 2016 arbitration ruling from the International Arbitration Tribunal clearly ruled that those resources there rightfully belong to the Philippines. So if we turn now to the question of rules, on the left here, this blue line I've shown is approximately the area of China's claim, 9-dash line claim, U-shaped line claim. After the arbitration, if one takes the logic of the arbitration seriously, then this on the right-hand side should be China's legitimate maritime claim. So, excuse me. A much shorter version, plus some areas of disputed sovereignty around these small rocks and reefs down in the south and Scarborough Shoal over here. So anything that China is doing in offshore Vietnam here, offshore Malaysia here, offshore the Philippines here, is a violation of at least the spirit and perhaps the letter of the arbitration ruling from 2016. But we don't know what China's legal position is. This is an extract from a book written by Wu Shih-tsun, who is the president of the National Institute of South China Sea Studies based in Hainan Island in China. He runs a think tank, which is jointly run by the Hainan province and the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So he is close to, but doesn't speak for Chinese policy. And you can see he defines it as sovereignty over all the island features, the rocks, the reefs, and that kind of thing. Rights defined by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, which you can argue about, but they're basically defined within international terms. But then he adds certain historic rights at the bottom down there. And this is the big question: what does historic rights actually mean? Now, a new development is that some Chinese officials are talking about rights based on the idea that China has 4 archipelagos in the South China Sea. Dongsha, known in English as Pratas, up here, which is occupied, in fact, by Taiwan at the moment. The Paracels, or Xisha in Chinese. The Zhongsha. Now, the irony about the Zhongsha is there aren't actually any islands there except for Scarborough Shoal here, but China talks about them being an archipelago. And the Spratlys or the Nansha down here. So these 4 shas. And we had an idea back in 2016 from a Chinese legal thinker that somehow the fact that these islands are grouped together would give them some rights over the much larger area of the South China Sea. And this is an area, this is a projection of what that might mean, drawn up by the CSIS think tank in Washington, where you can see that by projecting out claims from groups of islands, and I should say that this is something which UNCLOS, the UN Convention, does not support, how that might be another way that China might make a claim to the resources of the South China Sea. We're talking oil and gas, but also fish and other things. The historic rights argument was actually invented by a Taiwanese professor, Chen, but only in 1989. The historic rights argument is not at all historic. Unfortunately, it has been incorporated within China's 1998 law on the exclusive economic zone. So this is a major problem for the region. This rather specious piece of legal argument has been incorporated into Chinese official law. And then moving on to security, why does China want to hold on to this bit of water? I think we need to take into account the idea that China now has a viable submarine-based nuclear deterrent, and that it sees the central part of the South China Sea as a bastion, to use an old Soviet term, in which to hide its nuclear submarines, its nuclear missile submarines in the deep waters there. It controls the parasols, it controls some features in the Spratlys down the south, and my belief is that it would like to control Scarborough Shoal in the eastern side, close to the Philippines at some point, and then use its bases to try and keep out other militaries, whether they be regional or American or Japanese, in order to have a clear space to hide its nuclear missile submarines in. Now, of course, the problem is that the rest of the world regards the South China Sea as a vital transit space between the Middle East and Asia and the west coast of the United States and Africa. And obviously for the United States, it's a vital strategic interest. So it seems we're locked into a phase of confrontation here where both states, China and the US, see control of the South China Sea, or at least free access through it in the views of the US, as a vital national strategic interest. So this is not a place where we're going to see necessarily a proxy battle, but actually a real dispute going toe-to-toe over vital national strategic interests, nuclear deterrence and global access around the world's oceans. So I think we're going to see a rise in tension. I'm sure that both sides know exactly what's at stake, and no one's going to do anything particularly stupid, but the stakes are getting higher. And the involvement of local powers and regional powers and global powers in this area, I think, just makes things more and more difficult. And you can see that since the Trump administration came to power, this is a list of FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations, US missions to challenge some of China's restrictions around where other ships can sail. And you can see how the pace of operations has increased. 8 took place last year, 8 have already taken place so far this year, and we've still got a couple of months to go. These are only the publicly known ones. So I think we can see that the pace of US presence in sensitive parts of the sea has definitely increased during the Trump administration. And I would say it's probably likely to continue at that pace, regardless of who wins the US elections. Now, a quick comment about Taiwan. Now, in my view, Taiwan has the archives dating back to the Republic of China period, pre-1949, which will undermine a lot of the Chinese, the PRC maritime claims to historic rights and extended exclusive economic zones. They are there in the archives in Taipei, and they could be made public, and the Taiwanese government could make some public statements renouncing some of those claims. At the same time, Chinese activities in the southern part of the South China Sea are clearly threatening to Taiwan's security. The building up of bases on artificial islands are definitely a means of outflanking Taiwan to its southwest and could block US access to Taiwan in a time of conflict. But those bases and China's growing military presence in the South China Sea mean that China could easily pressure Taiwan. So the picture there is the island of Pratas in English, or Dongsha in Chinese. It sits all on its own on a coral reef way out in the northern part of the South China Sea. It's vulnerable to pressure, and a couple of weeks ago we saw Chinese or Hong Kong-based air traffic controllers denying access to a Taiwanese plane that was trying to land there. So I think Taiwan has this dilemma. Does it want to stick with a one China attitude to the South China Sea, or make its own Taiwanese position, which would undermine some of the Chinese maritime claims? There's obviously a lot to lose there. Can other states in Southeast Asia or outside Southeast Asia incentivize Taiwan through some means, through recognition or other incentives, to take a new position which would help unlock some of the issues in the South China Sea? There's more on this in my books. The Invention of China book has just come out, and it's got a little chapter on the emergence of the Chinese maritime claim in the South China Sea. And I'll finish it there. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for your very well argumented presentation. We are now going to leave the floor to the last member of this panel this morning, but definitely not the least. So this is Dr. Eva Peisova, who is an associate researcher at the French Foundation for Strategic Research, but, and most especially today, since the 1st of October, also the director of a newly established Japan program at the Free University of Brussels Institute for European Studies. This program will be part of the new Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at EIAS. Dr. Peisova is a Paris-based political analyst and commentator, specializing in security in Asia, maritime security, and EU-Asia relations. Till August of 2019, she has been in charge of the Asia portfolio at the Institute for Security Studies, or EIAS, supporting the EU's foreign and security policy agenda in Asia and managing also the European membership at the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific. She holds a PhD in strategic studies from the Rajaratnam School of National Studies in Singapore, and she has previously worked for the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the French Prime Minister's Office, OECD, and the Asia-Europe Foundation. She's also a guest lecturer at Sciences Paris, at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, the European Security and Defense College, and she also briefs EU policymakers and members of the European Parliament Research Trust, focused on the broader strategic dynamic within the Indo-Pacific region, including regional cooperation mechanisms, traditional and non-traditional maritime security challenges, good governance, and environmental security, as well as on the role of the EU as a security actor and provider. So, Dr. Peisova, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining today.
Well, thank you very much for this lovely introduction, and thank you to the EIAS for putting together this seminar. It's a pleasure to see many of familiar faces on my screen, at least, and of course to be able to speak on this very interesting subject. The basic premise or starting premise of the seminar seems to be that China is becoming more assertive in the region and starts to put its political discourse into action, as can be seen with the Hong Kong National Security Law, and therefore speculating about China's possible next moves in those two security hotspots. Well, when I was thinking about this question, especially for the South China Sea, I couldn't help asking myself a question of how much worse do we actually expect it to get? The thing is, when we look at the situation in the South China Sea for the past 20 years, we realize that China has not only always delivered on its promises, but it has pretty much crossed every red line there ever was. At the beginning, and as Bill Hayton also said, the 9-dash line was pretty much an ambiguous, abstract concept, and we all speculated on what it actually meant. Well, today, we know it's part of the national security strategy, with the South China Sea being a core strategic interest of China, over which it holds undisputable sovereignty, and is therefore non-negotiable part of the Chinese territory. In 2002, when the declaration on the code of conduct on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea was signed, pledging parties to self-restriction and non-militarization of the contested waters, China eventually started building up artificial islands in the South China Sea. And at the beginning, we were all thinking, well, that's acceptable. It depends what it intends to be doing with them. Well, today we have hard evidence since 2013 of the large-scale military installation in those disputed islands. And of course, as the parties now today work towards a more binding code of conduct in the South China Sea, that does not prevent further militarization or the violent clashes with the Vietnamese, with the Filipino, with the Malaysian fishermen that we can see in the news every day. In fact, the dispute has now claimed hundreds of civilian lives, and that keeps on going. What I'm trying to say is what we see today is not really anything new. It's a continuous process that we observe for the last 15 to 20 years. It's just done in a more efficient way, and it's more visible. So the question is where is our next red line? Now, we can assume that in the context of the US-China rivalry, these tensions are going to further intensify. But they will not necessarily only take place physically in the South China Sea theater, but also on all other fronts, on the economic front, on the technological front, and in the form of this hybrid warfare that we basically face already. And not just US and China, but all global actors, and that we need to get ready for. So China has this holistic approach to managing its security interests, and it does so on all the possible fronts, where all the fronts are interconnected. To continue this slightly grim assessment of the situation, we may argue that we have already exhausted all the available options. We may. There were efforts to shelve the dispute and focus on functional security cooperation, as was the case with the South China Sea workshops throughout the 90s. It didn't work out. We tried to engage in a dialogue without the external powers, as we can see with the progress of the Declaration of Conduct and the Code of Conduct today. And as I mentioned just before, it didn't prevent further militarization or the violent clashes. We were very much looking up to the Philippine complaint at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2013, hoping that this will provide the major breakthrough and clarity into the issue. Well, 4 years after the verdict, we know that China has been very much ignoring the verdict of the tribunal, and Philippines and other international parties did not really act upon it as actively as they should. Finally, we keep signaling our discontent and defend our principles of freedom of navigation through military means. The US have been conducting their freedom of navigation of operations since many years in the region. They have been joined by other actors, Australia, India, Japan, and of course also European powers, without necessarily China bulging. Now, we can discuss or blame ourselves that we could have acted sooner or harsher when there was time, but that doesn't really change the reality on the ground, is that China has pretty much all the means to exert effective control administratively and militarily on the ground. Now, to be less pessimistic, what did change? And to me, there's two major trends that we can observe today that could give us a little bit of hope. And the first is that the conflict has become much more internationalized. External powers who have for the longest time proclaimed to be neutral to the dispute are now voicing very openly, vocally, their interests in the freedom of navigation as part of their own national interest. It was the case from the United States, but also other actors, and of course, Europe. And I promised originally to speak about just the European interest. And here, I think there is space for optimism, because we see a much greater unity and determination to face China. We see it at the bilateral level in the current trade negotiations. We see it in the kind of general exhaustion by the wolf warrior diplomacy accentuated in the current pandemic context. We could see that in reaction to the visit of, to the counter reaction to the visit of the Czech Senate Speaker to Taipei. The European Union is now working pretty much towards an Indo-Pacific strategy or common position on the Indo-Pacific, with other partners sharing its values. When it comes to the physical actions on the ground, you know that France has been deploying its naval assets as part of its routine exercises, not calling it freedom of navigation operations as opposed to the US, since 2016. The UK has joined in 2018. Other countries discuss, such as Germany, the possibility to also deploy their naval vessels on the ground. And what is relatively little known among this criticism, never-ending criticisms of the EU non-action, is that these actions are actually supported not just by the global strategy, but by the EU maritime security strategy, which explicitly encourages the EU member states to use their naval capabilities to fight for the freedom of navigation and to defend the interests of all European nations. In maritime security in general, I think Europe has made significant progress. And again, France is taking the political and the operational leadership on this, but we see it in the Strait of Hormuz, for instance, where a flexible force of several of EU member states has been deployed in the freedom of navigation and then kind of enhancing situational awareness. We see that also in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think that there is space for optimism, and it could be a potential way forward, pending a kind of consensus at the 27 member states level. The second major breakthrough, potential breakthrough, is that we now have a ruling on the South China Sea. Even though we didn't necessarily act on time, or it's now since 2016 that we have it, but we have it. And that is here to stay. We have a position of international law on the legal nature of the various features in the South China Sea, and also on the historical rights of China. What I find very encouraging is the ongoing exchange at the UN level, which started last year, with now common positions by Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and most recently the joint note verbal by France, Germany, and the UK, who all condemn the legality of Chinese claims in the South China Sea vis-a-vis international law and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, this is an extremely needed progress because it follows up. It really picks up the verdict from 2016, and it works progressively towards its implementation. What is also very interesting is that China seems to hear it. You can judge that by the very swift reaction to these note verbals and protests, because every time within the space of 2-3 days, there is a counter reaction of China. So perhaps we have hit a sensitive point, and this could be a way to at least focus on a little bit more in the near future. So to conclude, I think we are learning our lessons, and we need to choose our battles. It is unlikely that China will give up its claims, and we will probably need to brace for the tensions to continue also on other fronts. As what I said, economic, technology, hybrid. But we should join forces on the freedom of navigation through diplomatic means, through legal means, through military means, in terms of freedom of navigation. Secondly, we need to stay united and coordinate our efforts. And this has been said also in the case of the Taiwan Straits. Here again, there are progress, there is concrete progress with the dialogue between Europe and the US on China. There are consultations with Australia, with Japan. This has already been mentioned, but also bringing it at the UN level. One thing is to discuss the legal grounds or to contest Chinese claims, but we can also bring to the UN level the very important issue of environmental degradation and resource conservation that is taking place while these disputes last. And finally, I guess we can learn from China a little bit, in a sense that we can be, acting holistically on all fronts, of course, and use our economic leverage and leverage in other issues, but be also more bold and less shy. And here, this would be probably part of better fitted into the first session of this seminar on Taiwan, but I very much liked the joint letter that was published by top think tankers in the aftermath of the Czech visit to Taiwan, is that perhaps we could rethink the one China policy, And perhaps learning from China is also, and deal with Taiwan more openly and encourage its participation in international society, in a way creating a fait accompli, as much as China taught us to do. I think I'll end here. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Pešová, thank you very much for your, again, very well argumented presentation and the examples you brought, also linking it to other strategic geostrategic locations in the world where similar types of evolutions are ongoing at the moment, and maybe bringing identical or completely different solutions to that question. Talk about questions. I would like to encourage all the participants in this webinar, so the audience, to share their questions either through YouTube or through Facebook. So this will eventually get to me, and I can inject your questions and ask them to the panelists. I already have a couple, so I would propose to start the Q&A with a couple of questions, and I will take one from the audience first, coming from Mr. Wolfgang Pauper, and he's asking the following question. Taipei and Korea are disputing the Okinotori-shima as a Japanese island for EEZ. Could it serve China as a precedent for activity in the South China Sea? So basically, the question is other actors in the region are kind of also disputing some of those islands, rocks, or I would say low tide elevations. So is this going to be positive or negative for the evolution of the Chinese action in the South China Sea? So from the panel, please take the floor if you want to answer that question. Yes, Bill, please.
Can I have a go? Okay, so for people who don't know, this little island, although the word island really is a bit generous, Okinotori-shima, is out in the Pacific, so south of Japan, and it really is just a sort of plug of rock that sticks up from the sea with a coral reef on it. And if it hadn't been for an awful lot of civil engineering by the Japanese side, it might actually have sunk beneath the waves. But Japan insists that it's a full island and therefore has an exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles, 400 kilometers all the way around it, which prevents fishermen from Japan, from China, Korea, Taiwan using it. Now there is an example, I mean, and it's exactly the same really in many ways as the Scarborough Shoal feature in the South China Sea. And the Philippines took China to this tribunal, and the tribunal ruled that the Scarborough Shoal, along with other features, wasn't a full island, wasn't entitled to an exclusive economic zone. And China could do the same thing. If China wanted to show that it had faith in international law and the international rules-based system, it could take Japan to exactly the same kind of tribunal. It could more or less take exactly the same case as the Philippines made and just change the word Scarborough Shoal to Okinotori-shima, and it would probably win the case. And it would be a way of bolstering the rules-based system and deconflicting the situation. It would have possibly unpleasant implications for lots of other countries where there are uninhabited islands where they're claiming exclusive economic zones, including some American islands in the Pacific, some British and possibly French islands in the South Atlantic and other places. But I guess we just have to manage that those consequences as they flowed from it.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Can I join a discussion? Yes, right. Can I join the discussion and share some of my views? Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Dr. Tsai, and then I will give the floor to Dr. Pešová afterwards.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think our distinguished colleagues have touched upon a very good point. That is about the dilemma facing Taiwan in the South China Sea. So I would like to use this opportunity, very good opportunity, to explain our good colleagues here about Taiwan's current policy toward the South China Sea. Yeah, Taiwan is one of the sovereignty claimer of the South China Sea, but we have been making every effort to play such a role as a constructive stakeholder for regional affairs, including the South China Sea situation. So, the current administration's policy towards South China Sea is that we continue to claim our sovereignty over the South China Sea, but we also call on all parties to resolve the disputes through peaceful means, particularly international laws like UNCLOS of 1982. And also we call on all parties to pay respect to the freedom of navigation and overflight, which is the central concerns to many like-minded friends, not only around the country, but also around the world. And one more thing is that China has proposed, China has proposed to collaborate with China on South China Sea issue, but this proposal from China, Taiwan has never taken ever. So that means we are not going to side with China on managing the South China Sea issue. And one more thing, allow me to add, would be about the effort taken by Taiwan. That is, what we are now doing in South China Sea is to show our soft power rather than hard power. For example, we have announced to build our Ituaba Island in the South China Sea into a center for scientific study and humanitarian rescue. And we also invite many countries around the region to join our scientific study in Ituaba Islands. So what I'm saying is that we try to build a good model for the management of the maritime disputes in the region. And this kind of policy attitude also related to another question on the disputes over the EEZ of Okinotori-shima. Yes, the disputes over Okinotori-shima is still under discussion within the UN system. So before United Nations can make a decision on the settlement of this dispute, Taiwan does not take any position on this issue. But before the issue could be able to resolve from the root, what Taiwan is now doing is to have negotiation with our Japanese counterpart to talk about how to share those fishing rights for Taiwanese fishery vessel in the region. So what I'm saying is that in Taiwan we try to make our policy responsible and predictable, and then to build a good model to manage those maritime disputes in the region. So I just offer those information for the reference of our good colleagues online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsai. Dr. Peisova?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add on what Bill said on the Okinotori-shima. The only difference legally, the only similar feature, if you want, with the Scarborough Shoal is that we are indeed talking about the submerged natural feature on which Japan has built up and eventually started to claim it as an island with its own EEZ. But the major difference between Okinotori-shima and the South China Sea island features is that it's not located in any overlapping sovereign claims, overlapping exclusive economic zones. And that's really changing a lot. One can build islands when it's your own and it's not directly infringing on any sovereign territory of another fellow country. But and of course the difference when it's built in contested waters.
Well, thank you very much. I will propose to shift to a second question. So some of you spoke during the presentation of this shift of influence or shift in international relations, of course, now more characterized by disputes rather than by collaboration. So we're clearly shifting from a collaborative world into a more competitive world. And especially in this region, in previous time, in this more collaborative world, we witnessed some of the actors or some of the countries there that were able to choose their allies. And of course, maybe see China as an economic ally, but then shift to the United States when it came to their security, and see the United States as a security ally. In this new world that is now emerging, will it still be possible to choose your allies, or will you need to really almost pledge allegation to one or the other? Thank you. So, who would like to take the floor on this question? Would you like to go? Thank you.
Well, I think that the primary position of everybody in Southeast Asia is to avoid having to choose as much as possible. I mean, they want to trade. They want with everybody. They want everybody to play by the rules and not have a conflict. And they realize they get benefits from both. I mean, a comment maybe from my discussions with Southeast Asian colleagues is that they think that the US has just gone missing from Southeast Asia in everything apart from military matters. You know, the ships keep sailing through, but where was the US when it came to the COVID response, for example, compared to the very public donations of aid from China? I mean, we can discuss whether the aid was useful or substandard and all the rest of it, whether and all the problems about China's openness. But it did make a considerable effort in traditional diplomacy, whereas the US seems to have forgotten how to do traditional diplomacy. It seems to be locked into this confrontational element with China and not really kind of winning hearts and minds so much in the region so much. Although having said that, I think a lot of countries in the region are quite happy to see a pushback against China because they are concerned that China is becoming far too assertive and taking actions that infringe their sovereignty. So yes, there will be different governments taking different views on this, and I think even within Southeast Asian countries there will be different groups within business circles or whatever, or ruling governing circles that will take different positions. So I think this is going to be the new normal, but ultimately they're going to want to refuse to choose if they can.
Thank you very much, Bill. Somebody else wants to take? Yeah, Mrs. Fotiga.
I think that we enjoyed certain time when actually approach to the trade or engagement and business engagement was pretty naive. I think that many countries, not only of the region, were heavily relying on Chinese PRC chains of supplies as well as PRC as the outlet for a variety of produce. Actually, it happened to countries all over the world, where I compare the engagement of the EU member states with Russia in the same, and dependence on energy supplies, then also undermining energy security of some parts of the European Union. It was pretty the same. Now we observe when we start to monitor activities of PRC closely, we observe that also trade relationship may be of security issue, part of security issues as well, and Australia most probably is the best example of this. Five Eyes member country that is absolutely like-minded to many of us, NATO partner in many areas, very important, yet relying on trade relationship with China heavily, and with higher level of security perception constraints. It's more than obvious that also trade relationship have to be revised, and that can make many problems. That is also a lesson that is to be learned for the EU and US, that most probably the security linkage and mutual reliance on military cooperation should be accompanied by very strong trade and tech relationship as well. So I think that we face changes and probably a revision to or rethinking of links between political West, democracies of the West, with between themselves and with the rest, with so-called systemic rivals. They are not as systemic rivals at all. It is much more now with security threats imposed.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Somebody else from the panel? Yes, Dr. Tsai?
Oh, yes. I think regarding the cooperation between like-minded friends on the management of the disputes over the South China Sea, we may be able to take into account some other some approaches. The number one is that maybe like-minded friends, including EU, can consider to voice its stronger concerns over the maintenance of the stability and the peace in the South China Sea or in Asia. Because I think maybe EU can, issue some kind of official statement or strategic document to show this kind of concerns. That may need to go through a process for discussion or even debate between EU member states. But I think that kind of debate or discussion will be very meaningful for EU friends, EU colleagues to reach some kind of consensus or at least some kind of common understandings over the situation in Asia. For example, what kind of issue are the central concerns to EU member states in Asia? What kind of law EU may be able to play in this region, Asia? And also what kind of policy action that EU may be able to encourage its member states to take in the future. I think that kind of discussion would be very meaningful to help EU to reach some kind of common understandings on the situation in Asia, and then to take some more concrete measures to prevent the situation in Indo-Pacific from getting worse. And another approach that maybe like-minded friends can consider would be about how to improve maritime capacity of some of Asian member states. As I just mentioned, China is now making use of gray zone activity in those disputed waters in the name of doing law enforcement procedures. So how to help Southeastern Asian country to do their capacity building in terms of maritime surveillance and maritime patrols may be quite important. And actually some of the like-minded countries like Japan have taken a procedure like this. Last week, Japan's Prime Minister Suga just paid a visit to Vietnam and signed some agreement with Vietnam and promised to offer some, facilities or vessels to support Vietnam's Coast Guard force. So I think that kind of action may be deserve the further discussion in EU to think about how to make use of this kind of approach to prevent China from going too far and from promote its de facto control, administrative control over the disputed water. Because if China can, create a new status quo in those disputed water, then, even though we talk about international laws, we talk about global norms, they may not be able to work a very strong function to regulate China's misbehavior that Beijing has been done already and cook a new status quo in the region. So I just share some of my thoughts for the reference of our colleagues online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsai. Somebody else on this question? Otherwise, I can shift to the last two questions. We can use them to round up the discussion. Should I do that? Yeah, I think so. All right, so I'm going to ask you the last two questions. We have about 10 minutes in front of us, so if you could then also round up within those 10 minutes. So the first question would be, how might like-minded governments encourage and build a consensus around some of the sensible steps proposed by Dr. Pecheva to counter China power projecting in the South China Sea? And then the second question is more specific about Singapore. So Singapore, clear ethnic ties with China, but also a very geostrategic location, and the Strait of Malacca being their lifeline. So what could be the role of Singapore in a potential conflict? So those are the two final questions. And I will just do a tour de table to make sure that everybody can provide an answer and or maybe wrap up their participation in this panel. So who would like to go first? Bill?
I was going to let somebody else go first since I've had 2 bites of the cherry, but anybody else want to jump in before I go for it?
I don't mind starting.
Go for it, everyone.
Okay. Well, how could like-minded governments encourage? No, well, I think it can be taken at several levels. It needs to be taken at several levels because not all governments are equally like-minded. Some are more like-minded than others. But the UN level that I mentioned is one. Of course, I mean, currently we have almost 10 countries that have jointly submitted their response. It could be more. And eventually this could be taken a little bit further. There could be a task force or a consultation level working group at the UN level that could eventually think on how to bring this further. But that's really just on the legal level and on the legality of Chinese claims in general, follow-up of the PCA ruling. At the more functional level, I think we need to constantly work bilaterally, trilaterally with the different regional actors. And I'm talking more here in the first part, these extra regional one. There is consultation with Japan, with Australia, with India, individually, but also trilaterally, to see what are the common interests from the respective capitals and to see where we can cooperate. And here we arrive, we should focus on really more concrete issues. Typically, the low-hanging fruit would be fisheries, environmental degradation, resource conservation. This is the sort of thing that we all can agree that have an international impact and that have a potential specific implication for the South China Sea. So eventually, afterwards, bringing this into some sort of efforts at the UN level, or making legislations for the conservation of resources, or addressing the problems of climate change or disaster relief. These are the sort of functional everyday security issues that I think that all like-minded countries can agree upon. The problem is that when we start talking about the rules-based order in general, we basically shift in too many different ways, and it can be tricky. Cooperation with Southeast Asian countries is ongoing. There are capacity building efforts that Japan is doing with ASEAN, that Australia is doing with ASEAN in law enforcement, in maritime surveillance. Frankly, there are many ongoing efforts. And of course, the European Union is also very much engaged, again, at the level of ASEAN, but also individual ASEAN countries such as Vietnam and Indonesia in enhancing maritime situational awareness. So this is also a work in progress. I'm keeping my optimistic stance on this. On Singapore, I think anyone who has been observing this small country in Southeast Asia has been impressed by its diplomatic skills lately, acting pretty much as a mediator in the case, for instance, hosting the US North Korea summit 2 years ago. So there could be a potential, and it may be a far-fetched idea, for Singapore to play a sort of a mediating role. The question mentions a ethnic population of China, but of course it's strategically very close to the United States, and it is a fully fledged member of ASEAN, a strong member of ASEAN. So it could eventually be this connecting actor between these various claimants and parties.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pesova. It's really a pleasure to have you on the panel this morning. So, Bill, do you want to go second?
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think I agree with all of that. I mean, the question of whether the EU could say that, for example, every fish imported into the EU has to be caught within a legitimate exclusive economic zone claim, I mean, that would be ideal, but I think the technicalities of actually managing and enforcing that would be very difficult. But I think it would be a good ambition to have. I think some of the things we worry about in Europe would be two things. What would be the consequences for European states for actually taking measures, and do they fear that taking particular measures might actually exacerbate, make the situation worse out in the South China Sea or the region? And I think often there's a kind of sense that somehow China is too big to tackle, and I think we need to recognize that European states have plenty of leverage. I mean, just the fact that China has large infrastructure projects and under consideration in the UK, for example, should give the UK some degree of leverage. Plus all the discussions about Huawei and 5G and all the rest of it. We do have the means to defend ourselves, and I think just as we fear exacerbating the situation out in Asia. So we need to make clear that if the situation gets worse without our intervention, that we have some ways of responding to. One small point, which is my own personal favorite, is that I think we need to understand some of the drivers of Chinese behavior in the South China Sea, and this sense of entitlement, which comes from a particular reading or misreading of the historical evidence. And really, to try and undermine the driver of that part of the conflict, one really needs to look at the historical evidence and get into some of the reasons why China behaves the way it does. And I think it's fairly easy to actually explode a lot of the Chinese territorial arguments just by referring to the evidence. And by going at that angle, I think one could maybe hope to undermine some of the emotion that underpins Chinese behavior in the South China Sea.
May I on this as well?
Yeah.
Thank you. On Singapore, I very much agree with Dr. Pesova on this. Singapore is a very important part of ASEAN and playing very constructive role there. And recently the proofs of diplomatic efficiency of this country are evident. So probably there is still much room for further actions. And in terms of the EU leverage and possibility to influence positively the situation and the region is also relying on our trade links with China, and still enormous field for maneuver. We quite recently learned that the monitoring systems that were installed in the European Parliament are of the same produce, for example, as surveillance equipment used to monitor Uyghurs in Xinjiang province of PRC. I spend a lot of my time in Brussels and see actual evidence of Chinese produce everywhere. So we have really much leverage on China in using argumentation, being it human rights or security issues in our relationship with PRC. I think that during the summit, many topics were already raised, but the key issue is to take all spheres, all areas of engagement with PRC holistically and make this overview as complete as possible. And also key is in our transatlantic cooperation, and of course, naturally, with like-minded countries in the region, in the Pacific area. Thank you.
Mrs. Fotiga, thank you very much for your participation in the panel discussion this morning and for the answers to the questions that have been asked. And I would say that the final word would be to Dr. Tsai. Dr. Tsai, the floor is yours.
Right. Regarding the Singapore issue, I would like to share some of my understanding on ASEAN countries' position over South China Sea issue. We know ASEAN system mainly cover 3 pillars for their cooperation. Number 1 is security. Number 2 is economy, and number 3 would be social changes. So it's just very unusual that ASEAN member states have been failed to issue a consensus on South China Sea problems, which is a very important security issue in this region. So to my understanding, some of the ASEAN member states, like Indonesia and Singapore, has been proposing the discussion within the ASEAN system to talk about how to reach some kind of consensus on the South China Sea issue. Of course, given that different ASEAN member states may have different considerations, may have different calculations, so it's always very difficult for ASEAN member states to reach a consensus in this context. But I think if more and more ASEAN member states would like to have some discussions or would like to have some debates over the South China Sea issue, that would be very helpful for ASEAN member states to show some kind of concerns over the disputes in the South China Sea by issue some kind of joint statement or chair statement after their leaders meeting. So I think ASEAN is a very important mechanism, regional mechanism, and ASEAN member states may need to have some more discussions over the situation in the South China Sea, so as to create some kind of policy stance within the ASEAN system, and then China understand the consideration and the concerns from countries around. So that's that's the footnote I would like to add.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and I guess it's now time to close this discussion. I thought was very, very fruitful, providing also a lot of arguments and research to the question of the perils of the South China Sea. So I would like to the European Institute for Asian Studies for organizing the discussion. I would like to thank the audience for joining us today and for the quality of your questions. But most of all, I would like to thank all 4 of the panelists in this discussion for really their high level and insightful participation and also the information that they provided to us. So thank you very much to all of you. And I'm closing this discussion right now. Thank you, and have a nice day, and stay all safe and healthy in those difficult times. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Also, on behalf of EIAS, I would like to thank all of you for the discussions this morning, and we hope to see you in Brussels very soon, and in the meantime, most likely online. So we'll keep you updated on all of our activities in the next coming weeks, and stay safe, stay healthy, and see you soon. Bye.